Buen dia, welcome, bom dia. Thank you for joining us for this new edition of Marval Live Talks. My name is Gustavo Giai. I am a partner at Marval, and I will be moderating today's session on sports corporations. We will discuss recent developments in corporate law in Argentina, focusing on the football industry. There's no doubt that football is the most popular sport in Argentina. It is deeply ingrained in our culture and considered more than just a sport. It is played in the streets, parks, schools, everywhere, and millions of football fans cheer for their teams during match days on weekends and provide their support at every possible moment in the stadiums, in pre and post game discussions, when sharing a coffee or a drink, or in our popular asados and wearing their football jerseys in our everyday lives. The structure of football in Argentina is extensive and complex. Approximately 250 to 300 clubs participate in the main 7 tournaments under the regulation of the Argentine Football Association, AFA, which uses a pyramidal system to organize these competitions. In addition to these clubs, there are more than 3,500 clubs that are part of over 250 regional leagues associated with AFA. These regional clubs compete to move up to the national divisions within the pyramid. The new administration that is running the country since December 2023 have implemented several measures to promote business in Argentina, and the football industry was not the exception. Such new regulation, as we will discuss today in more detail, included an amendment to the national sports law, which establishes that entities may adopt the form of sports corporations or Socidades Anónimas Deportivas, SAD, thereby removing the requirement that only civil associations may participate in organized sport in Argentina. This amendment was followed by additional regulation that we will explain later. This change aims to create a more competitive environment, enabling clubs to receive private funding and improve their structures. This possibility is not new in the international football industry, as several countries adopted a similar approach. In particular, the United Kingdom and Brazil have put in place similar corporate structures and implemented similar legislation, and football clubs have been operating as sports corporations for quite some time already. The purpose of this panel today is to look into the intersection of corporate law and sports, specifically football in Argentina, to focus our discussion on how the new models were implemented in the UK and Brazil, and to assess whether the experience in those countries may provide valuable insights into future directions for Argentine football. To this end, I am extremely pleased to introduce our guest speakers. First, Carol Kus is the head of sports, entertainment, and media at the UK firm Mills and Reeve. Carol specializes in sports law with a particular focus on football, advising on football regulatory matters, including on all aspects of player transfers, player contracts, immigration, and image rights. She also advises on contentious and disciplinary matters at a domestic and international level, including before FIFA, UEFA, and the Court of Arbitration for Sport. Carol is the head of the Latin American desk at Mills and Reeve. She speaks Spanish very fluently, so she regularly advises Spanish and Latin American clubs, players, and agents on contentious and non-contentious sports law matters. She is also a FIFA mediator and lectures domestically and internationally on sports law issues. Thank you, Carol, for joining us today. Joining panel is Simon Ulrich, also from Real Madrid. Simon is a corporate lawyer whose primary focus is supporting the firm's sports, media, and entertainment sector. His practice includes sports M&A work, the provision of advice on the constitution and structure of sporting organizations, and advice surrounding joint ventures and other collaborative sporting relationships. His clients include EFL and Premier League football clubs, the Ryder Cup, England Golf, and individual athletes turned investors. He regularly helps clients with the formation of new companies and corporate groups, including dealings with investors and the creation of boards of directors and their governance. I'm also privileged to introduce another guest speaker from Brazil, Rodrigo Monteiro de Castro, from the Brazilian firm Monteiro de Castro Setoguti Advogados. Rodrigo is the founding partner of his own firm and specializes in corporate law and M&A, capital markets, and sports law. In addition to being a highly experienced corporate lawyer, Rodrigo is the co-author of the law that implemented the sports corporations in Brazil and have been advising companies and football clubs in Brazil after the law was implemented. And last but not least, I'm very pleased to introduce my partner and friend Pablo Artagabeitia, who is the head of our firm's corporate practice group. Pablo's area of specialization is centered on commercial and corporate law and has extensive experience doing corporate and M&A work. Thank you to all of you for joining us this morning. So, moving on to the UK, Carol and Simon, could you please help us understand what is the structure of the football market in the UK, the legal status of football clubs, and the main corporate law considerations applicable to them?
Well, thank you so much, Gustavo, for such a lovely introduction. It's a pleasure for us both to be here on such an esteemed panel. So thank you. I'll take the first two questions, which are about the structure of the football market generally and the legal status of clubs. And I'll just touch on the football regulations that impact on that. And then Simon will talk a little bit more about the specifics of doing a club acquisition or a disposal in the UK. So first of all, I'm just going to touch on the Premier League because it's, ultimately top of the pyramid. So the structure there is that the Premier League itself is a limited company, and the clubs that participate in the Premier League all have a share in that company. So there are 20 shares that are divided between the clubs that participate in the Premier League. There's a special share that goes to the FA as well. But ultimately, when a club is promoted to the Premier League, it then takes the shares of those relegated clubs that are going down to the Championship. So we only ever have 20 members in the Premier League. And the way that the Premier League operate, as you may know, is by kind of collective selling. So ultimately, the Premier League, the limited companies established by the Premier League, will go to market and sell the broadcasting rights, the commercial rights, domestically and internationally. And then that revenue is then shared between those clubs that are party to the Premier League shares. So it's split, and there's a various structure for how that revenue is shared. In terms of the clubs themselves, they're actually required to be established as companies, so limited companies, and that's a provision within the Premier League articles themselves, Article 4.2. So that actually means that they are then, by their nature, open to investment. So this is something that may be coming down the track for Argentina and has already happened in Brazil. And as a result of that, we've seen an influx of foreign investment, frankly. The current membership structure of the Premier League, there's 17 of the 20 clubs that have at least one foreign investor who owns at least 10% of the club shareholdings. There's another thing to note, which is actually once you get the foreign investment, then the chances are that the foreign investors may have interests elsewhere. So what we've actually seen as well is increasing financial globalization that's led to sort of a consolidation of the market. And so there's been a study done by CIES, and it was found that there were just 17 entities, and they held stakes in 48 clubs across 20 companies. I mean, the MCO, the multi-club ownership structure that comes to mind for many people will be the City group structure there. They, as you'll know, they will hold investments or interests in clubs in Latin America, the likes of Montevideo, Torque, Bolivar, and Bahia. 12 clubs in total. Interestingly, of the 20 teams in the Premier League, over half of them, 12 of them, have owners who've got significant stakes in other football clubs. And just purely from a regulatory perspective, because I envisage this is the sort of thing that the Argentinian clubs are going to face down the line when it comes to potential international investments. And then there may be a multi-club ownership structure involved in that. So what then happens when clubs end up competing in the same continental competition? And so that's the thing that we've been addressing in Europe, and UEFA have been addressing recently. So both Manchester City and Manchester United have ended up competing in the same European competition, so Champions League and Europa League, with other entities from the same group structure. And clearly, there's an issue over the integrity of the competition at that point. So UEFA have taken quite a pragmatic stance in terms of this season coming, and they've allowed the clubs to effectively enter into a blind trust for the other club to effectively enable there to be a sort of independent body which runs the club to prevent that conflict of interest. But ultimately, there is a rule that provides that no club or legal entity should have control or decisive influence over more than one club. And so we'll see how that evolves. And I would say for Latin America, CONMEBOL will be dealing with the same issues coming down the track. And clearly, when these markets open up, we already see it in Brazil, we'll see it in Argentina potentially, how then the confederations deal with these sorts of issues. And then just finally, I'd say FIFA is also going to have to grapple with these sorts of issues. So we have the Club World Cup coming up in 2025, and there's 32 clubs involved there. Chances are that those clubs will potentially be involved in some multi-club ownership structure. And therefore, how will FIFA deal with this in terms of these clubs competing against each other in their own competitions? So yes, whole layers of regulation, which clearly I find fascinating. I will hand over to Simon to talk a little bit more about the idiosyncrasies of kind of doing a deal in England and investment there, and what is unique about acquiring or disposing of a football club there.
Thanks, Carol. So as Carol touched on, the English football pyramid has a long history of its clubs being formed as what we call limited companies with a share capital. Some of the clubs that currently play in the Premier League, in the EFL, so many of them are still operating under the original company that was formed in many cases in the 1800s. So those companies have been around for a very long time. And that's probably one of the first considerations if you are looking to buy or invest in one of these companies, is you've got potentially sort of 130 years worth of corporate history to look at and to unpick. Now, obviously, under law and under limitations and stuff, you're probably only really mostly interested in the more recent years and in the years when the individuals who are in who you're buying from or investing with have actually been in control of the club. But you will often, as lawyers, have to look at documents that are many, many, many years old, and just kind of get familiar with these now quite archaic documents that you will come across. I'm advising at the moment on a deal where the company was originally incorporated in the early 1900s, and so we've had to look at the Articles of Association there from 110 years ago, and then figure out how they've changed. So that's been very interesting. I think the other thing to say is we don't have a special corporate vehicle reserved for sports clubs in this country. They are incorporated in the same form as a company that makes dog food might be, or a company that sells cars, that operates a shop on the high street. And so from that perspective, actually, when you approach buying or selling a football club, mechanically it's very similar. You will have a share purchase agreement, you will have stock transfer forms, there will be board minutes, there is a disclosure process. These things are common across jurisdictions and common across all industries and sectors that we deal with. What really makes football unusual is the nature of the assets that the business owns. In particular, the fact that player registrations are of huge value. And that's particularly true at the top of the pyramid in the Premier League. Obviously, the lower down you go, maybe the players are not moving for quite such huge transfer fees, but they can still represent a very high percentage of the value of the club. And then the second major asset is often the stadium, if that's still held within the group. It's often held in a subsidiary company off to the side, but it's often still held beneath the main company. And the third major asset is the share that I will just focus on a Premier League club here, is the share that Carol mentioned earlier that the club owns in the Premier League. And that is a key asset, because through that share, a Premier League club earns £100 million a season, and will earn more and more if it stays up. So when you're conducting your due diligence, you need to pay special attention in particular to the player registrations and to the players themselves, because these are human beings who have lives and make mistakes. And a player who makes a mistake outside of whilst registered to a club could fall in value quite dramatically. And I'm thinking here particularly, we always make sure that we ask for disclosures and due diligence around drugs and doping and betting issues for players. So you need to pay particular attention, both as a buyer and a seller. You need to be very clear of basically what your players are up to, and whether there are any risks going forward. The last thing you want as a buyer is to buy a football club assuming that in the course of the summer you'll be able to sell a player for £30 million, and that receipt of that money will then allow you to do what you want to do with the club. And 2 weeks after you buy the club, it comes out that player's fallen foul of the WADA rules or of the betting rules and is suspended or even worse, because that would throw a lot of your finances into disarray. So there's that consideration from a due diligence perspective. We also have over here rules that the Premier League and the EFL, who run the next three divisions beneath the Premier League, have, which are rules around the change of control. Now they're often known as the owners and directors test, and then more colloquially they will be referred to as the fit and proper persons test. And they are a set of rules that set out certain criteria that prospective owners and directors of football clubs must satisfy. Now, they aren't yet part of the country's laws, although that may change in the future, and I will briefly touch on that. So that they are rules of the Premier League and the EFL, and essentially they're not too hard to satisfy, so long as you're not a rampant criminal or a fraudster, so long as you have not bankrupted multiple football clubs, you are likely to pass. but they are a live test, and they do have to be satisfied prior to the transaction completing. So they are also something that you need to bring to the table very early on in the transaction process. Make sure that all parties understand, in particular the new owners. They will have to reveal a lot of information to the Premier League before they've even actually officially taken over the club. So there's some client management work to do there. Now, it is likely in the next couple of years we are going to get a government introduced regulator in the UK. I've been part of the team that's been looking at drafting that law. And that is going to be an independent body, independent of the Premier League, independent of the clubs, that will have some of these powers, including this owners and directors test, is likely to move over to this new government body that will be answerable to our parliament, and that will be tasked with enforcing this kind of thing. So there is a bit of a landscape change coming. Fundamentally, it won't change too much about the actual way a transaction is run, but it will change who you talk to and who you have to be regulated by. So that is something to look out for. That will be in the news. We're expecting the draft law to come to Parliament in the next few months, although that is a resurrection of a law that was in the process prior to our general election last month. I think that takes me up to time, Gustavo, so I hope we've managed to cover everything.
Yes, thank you, Carol and Simon. Just a very brief question, Simon, for you maybe. Is the acquisition of a club subject to approval by the Premier league or federation, or is it how is the approval process?
Yeah,
you talk about the indirect owners test, etc., but does it require specific approval, or what is the landscape there?
So the terms of the agreement are not subject to approval. So the Premier League are not going to read the share purchase agreement and comment on any of the actual commercially agreed terms, so far as they satisfy all of the rules in the Premier League handbook. What the owners and directors test is interested in doing is making sure that the new owners are notified to the Premier League, and this is where you buy more than 25% of a club, and that essentially it all sort of came through in the last sort of 10-15 years as a result of fan pressure and people buying football clubs who then turned out to maybe not be running them with the community in mind. As you said at the top, football clubs are incredibly important to the culture and the community that they're based in. And in the United Kingdom, we were getting clubs go out of business or collapse entirely, with a huge impact on that. And so the leagues had to bring in some rules. So they brought in these they're very basic rules, really. As I said, there are rules. If you're banned from being a director of a company, or if you've owned a football club in Spain and you're banned from owning a football club in Spain, you won't be able to buy a football club in England. So they're really looking at who you are rather than the terms of the actual transaction, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Simon. And we may go back to you and Carol, later at the end. So this was very interesting and very practical, and we really appreciate your insight. So let us move to Brazil now. Rodrigo, as I mentioned in my introduction, you co-drafted the amendments to the Brazilian law, which allow sports clubs to become corporations or limited companies. So could you please share with us how that process was? What happened after the law was implemented? And what is the current status of the Brazilian football industry?
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much, Gustavo. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Marval, whose reputation is known throughout the world for the kind invitation. I would also like to take this opportunity to congratulate its partners, Gustavo and Pablo, for the initiative. Also like to say how pleased I am today to be speaking alongside Carol Carlos and Simon Lawrence from the equally famous Mills and Reeve law firm. And not least, I would like to thank everyone who is connected to this broadcast for the participation. Well, Gustavo, in 15 minutes, I'll try to, or maybe less, I'll try to present a topic that I could easily talk about for 15 hours or maybe 15 days, namely the really profound transformation that has been taking place in Brazil, in our soccer market. A market, by the way, that was really recently created with the advent of the Football Companies Act of 2021. In Portuguese, Lei da Sociedade Anônima do Futebol. This is very important, not Sociedade Anônima Desportiva, because it applies only to football and not to sports in general. A lot which I had the honor of devising and participating in drafting. Well, to begin with, let's just go back in time just to understand what it was and what we are going to, where we are going to. From the beginning of soccer in Brazil, at the end of the 19th century until the enactment of the aforementioned law of football companies, football activity was organized by non-profit associations, run by politicians of some kind who, in some way, exercise almost philanthropic functions, or importance, use the clubs which they didn't own and didn't invest a dollar in for personal projects. So for decades, the clubs were run in Brazil irresponsibly and without concern for improving their assets. In addition, debts were accumulated, and to make matters worse, new sources of income were not developed. This scenario has led to an accumulated debt of the main Brazilian clubs of around 10 billion reais. We're talking about 2021. At the same time, soccer had become, we all know, more competitive, professionalized, resource intensive, and expansionist, especially in Europe. And as a result, most Brazilian teams have become a kind of exporters of players, or let's say exporters of commodities. Their main business became exporting players, unfortunately. That's when a simple, very, very simple idea emerged, as simple as a Columbo's egg, changing the model of ownership. In other words, transferring ownership from the sphere of non-profit association to the assets of a company whose specific purpose was football, and let's say will always be football and only football. And so the idea arose of creating a model that would allow clubs to transfer their football assets via drop-down to a new legal entity that would be governed by a certain rules of its own, contained in the Football Companies Act, and for the rest, regulated by the Brazilian Corporations Act. And it's very important. The Brazilian Corporations Act is approximately 50 years old, has been surgically modified or adjusted from time to time to incorporate corporate and business development, doctrine, and case law, and constitutes a kind of safe haven for investors as well as for the markets. It is within the system that the football company's subsystem has been inserted. So we're talking about a subsystem, and at the center of the subsystem was or is the Sociedade Anônima do Futebol, and gravitating around it, so that it wasn't just a formality, some satellites that gave it materiality, which means an efficient system of governance, compliance and information disclosure techniques, a special tax regime, an innovative and unique, maybe on the planet, instrument of financing football, in the case of the football debenture, means of renegotiating debts, and not least, incentives for the development of public schools through football, which is an issue here in Brazil. Well, all of these aspects make up the Football Companies Act, which therefore created a new subtype of company in Brazil, the Sociedade Anônima, or vehicle, the Sociedade Anônima do Futebol. Well, something very interesting happened. Immediately after the law was passed, it was thought that the old regime, the old system, those politicians would react to prevent it from becoming effective. But a significant event of global significance helped to ensure, in my opinion, that the course of history will not be interrupted. The announcement at the time that former footballer Ronaldo, which we call him the phenomenon, would make a capital contribution to the Socidades Anónimas Deportivas set up by Cruzeiro, one of the country's most traditional clubs, and which still has Argentinian footballer Juan Pablo Sorin as an idol. Well, this event attracted the attention and interest of national and international investors of all different profiles. This was really, really important. Include short-term investors who take the advantage of stressful situations, as we all know, and long-term investors. Well, the result is expressed in numbers. There are already more than 70 football companies in Brazil, and around 10 more are on the way. Of the 20 teams in the top division, our Premier League, 7 are Socidades Anónimas Deportivas. 1 is a regular limited company, and another 5 are moving towards the Socidades Anónimas Deportivas model. Well, all this in only 3 years. And all of this is just, in my opinion, the very, very beginning, the tip of the iceberg, which could reveal, if not the biggest, one of the 2 or 3 biggest soccer markets on the planet. After all, Brazil, this is important, in addition to an internal market of around 150 million fans and consumers, apart, of course, from the external potential, there are here in Brazil more than 20 teams or clubs with more than 1 million fans, only in Brazil. Besides, among the most significant corporations involved in football, Gustavo, practically all have followed the same pattern. The club set up Socidades Anónimas Deportivas, transfers football assets, and becomes the controlling shareholder with 100% of the capital. We're still talking about the club. Then an investor subscribes to a capital increase, injects funds, and becomes a shareholder, most of the time the controlling shareholder. And simultaneously, investor and the club sign a shareholders agreement. Shareholders agreement. The participation of the investors varies depending on the case. This is the way, for example, that Cruzeiro, Vasco, Botafogo, Bahia, Curitiba, and others have done. And so far, it's important, again, there hasn't been a more sophisticated transaction involving capital markets, either through more approachable instruments such as debentures or, above all, through an IPO. Another very important fact concerning Brazil, although not significant from a numerical point of view, there has already been a parallel transaction which the pessimists said that will never happen. Ronaldo, the former footballer, in a very short space of time, he managed to reorganize Cruzeiro, which was technically bankrupt, put it back in the first division, our Premier League, and this year is already at the top of the table. Along the way, he received an offer to sell his stock, and did so to a local businessman, a well-known billionaire, who promised to continue and invest new resources to keep Cruzeiro at the top. And I think now a question for all of us, Brazilians and Argentinians. But is football companies act just about the market investments? I would say quite the opposite. These factors are, let's say, the instruments of the main reason, which is the perpetuation of the teams and the joy, very, very, very important, the joy of our fans. To begin, and very importantly, the Football Companies Act in Brazil does not oblige a club to incorporate a SAF. They were all set up voluntarily by decision of the respective club members. Okay, and why? Because the clubs were no longer in Brazil in a position to be competitive, to increase revenues, to pay off debts, and remain relevant under the regime of a civil association with no economic purpose, which generates debts rather than wealth for the country. In addition, and almost finished, the Football Companies Act created instruments to preserve the history, tradition, and relationship of the fans with the team, giving the clubs vetoes on issues such as changing the name, color, location, anthem, and merging with other local teams. In other words, the Football Companies Act allows agents who previously didn't communicate with each other, the clubs that are the current owners of the football assets on one hand, and the financiers on the other, to meet and do business to the benefit of everyone, and especially the fans. And after all, in my opinion, what do the fans really want? And this is important for the Argentinian debate, in my opinion. The fans, what they do really want? Well, that the teams is owned by a club, subject to a political process of electing managers, in which the fans do not participate, at least in Brazil, and the club is unable to access money to invest in football, or fans, do they prefer their teams to be organized under a regulated model, but one that gives them the freedom to agree on structures that will make sustainable and perennial projects possible, and enable the entry of resources and investments that will keep them relevant locally, nationally, or even internationally, as the case may be, and in tune, of course, with the fans. Well, in short, and now I'm really I'm finishing now. The movement in Brazil, which is still in its infancy, is irreversible, and the strength not only of historically traditional teams, but also of others who, with the advent of the Football Companies Act, have become protagonists, indicates that the country should have, in the short term, 10 to 15 structured, economically stable teams with the structure to compete strongly for place and titles in South American competitions. In other words, in my irrelevant and external opinion, which I'm concerned about because I have a lot of affection for Argentina, really a lot of affection for Argentina and Argentine football. By the way, I visit local stadiums every time I go to the country, from the most well-known to the most impressive or picturesque, such as the Chacaritas Stadium. If Argentine teams do not realize what is happening in Brazil and don't prepare for a reaction in the short time, they will find it, in my opinion, very difficult to compete structurally with Brazil, despite, of course, the recent and well-deserved World Cup title. Well, these were the words I wanted to put across in this international and incredible debate promoted by Marval. Thank you very much again, and I really hope that Argentina and the Argentine clubs pick up and follow the right path. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. It was very interesting to hear your practical experience, since you've been so much involved in all this process. And I was tempted to ask you whether you are a Cruzeiro fan or not, because it seems that you took a lot of pride of talking about Cruzeiro. But we'll leave that for another time. Don't worry. So okay, perfect. And you have to promise that when you come to Argentina again, we go to the stadiums together. Okay, so very interesting to see that, in Brazil, very quickly, since 21 to date, nearly 40% of the clubs, 20 clubs that play in the top league, in the first division, are using this vehicle that was created by the law that you drafted. So very, very quickly, a transformation that quickly happened as a result of that legislative change. So thank you again, Rodrigo, for your very valuable insight. So moving on to Pablo and to Argentina now. Pablo, could you please explain the latest amendments to the Argentine corporate law and the decisions or resolutions issued in Argentina, and what are the main practical considerations of what we may see happening, in the short or mid-term from now?
Okay, thank you, Gustavo. Very interesting what we were hearing about Brazil and United Kingdom. Probably you're coming from the future, and we are trying to see if we can move forward in that direction. The most important thing in Argentina is just to give you a background about the Argentinian situation, as mentioned by Gustavo. In Argentina, the clubs has been formed under the umbrella of non-profit civil association. And having such a structure allow them to obtain the benefits instrumented through the sport law, tax benefits, legal benefits, all stuff. And talking about football, the Asociación del Fútbol Argentino, AFA, in the bylaws established that only a non-profit civil association could be part of the football association. This is the background, the historic situation in Argentina. What happened? This year, the new government, issued a new decree of necessity and urgency, allowing the civil associations to be transformed or to be part of Socidades Anónimas Deportivas, so that's commercial entities, without losing the benefits of the sport law. This is a big change for the market. And people in Argentina are very interested to see what is going to happen. Obviously, we are facing a lot of concerns, not only from the clubs, but as well from the associations. This new decree is not a law. The difference with the city is that we don't have a law. It's a decree. It's a presidential decree that is valid unless it's rejected by the chambers in the Congress. We have two chambers, the Senate and the deputies. This new decree was already rejected by the Senate, and we're still waiting what is going to happen in the chambers of representative of deputies. So the decree is still valid. Under this decree, once the decree is regulated, the associations, in this case, Asociación del Fútbol Argentino, have 1 year to change and adapt the bylaws, their own bylaws, to accept Socidades Anónimas Deportivas as members. This situation has created a lot of noise. Obviously, the Asociación del Fútbol Argentino is against this new decree in such a way they're saying that it's affecting their own freedom in order to determine how to associate the members. We have seen a lot of challenges from the legal point of view, not only, for example, in the province of Buenos Aires, we could see that the public registry of commerce in the province of Buenos Aires has rejected a transformation of a small entity that was looking to be to be transformed in a Sociedad Anónima Deportiva. And this was an initial case that was ratified by the second stage legal court of appeals. So we can see small fights in order to see how it's going to be solved, this situation. For example, in the province of Buenos Aires, a legal entity in the city of Salto requested to the judge to stop the application of the decree in order to allow Sociedades Anónimas Deportivas to be part of the entity. And in this case, the judge allowed this petition and created a lot of uncertainty in the market, saying, well, what is going to happen? Because this award is going to be applied only in the province, in the jurisdiction of Salto, or must be applied to all the Argentinian territory. So this is a fight that we are facing now, where the government is saying, well, this resolution, legal resolution, only applies in Salto, that is a small village, a small city in the province of Buenos Aires. On the other hand, Asociación del Fútbol Argentino is moving forward in order to obtain what we call an injunction in order to stop from using this resolution to stop any new regulation of the decree. Why the AFA, the Asociación del Fútbol Argentino, is interested on that is because once the regulation of the decree is done, they have only 1 year to change and to adapt the bylaws, their own bylaws. So they're very concerned about this, and they're trying to determine that the government cannot move forward unless this legal situation is solved. So what we can see here in Argentina is certain uncertainty about what is going to happen, because if we don't have a law, we have a decree. The decree has been challenged by the Asociación del Fútbol Argentino, has been challenged by other entities. The main concern here is, well, we are afraid about these new investments that are coming to Argentina to get some profits, but at the end, they are not looking for the needs of the social needs of that any club in such a way is doing in the society. So the concern here is we don't know what is going to happen with this. We don't want the clubs are fulfilling a very important social role in the community. We don't want something that could jeopardize or change this situation. We are trying to learn. We're trying to see what is happening in other countries. We have been seeing what is happening in England, what is happening in Brazil. Brazil is very close to us. They have the same feeling about football. It's like in Brazil, Argentina, always the football has been a religion. So nowadays, you say, well, we have the ground to invest in Argentina right now. Well, we don't know. I don't know, because we have to see what is going to happen with in the chamber, in the Congress, if this decree is going to be challenged by the Congress. What is going to happen if, once regulated, the Asociación del Fútbol Argentino decides not to accept that? And what is going to happen if a legal entity or a club wants to be transformed in a Socidades Anónimas Deportivas and is trying to affiliate before the Asociación del Fútbol Argentino and is rejected? What is going to happen? Well, probably with this decree, they will have the tools to challenge Asociación del Fútbol Argentino, unless the Congress finally rejects the decree. So this is a situation. We don't have a law. We have a decree. We have the decree is in the Congress. We are waiting what's going to happen with the deputies, what they're going to decide. And in the meantime, we have some challenges, specifically in the province of Buenos Aires. And then we are seeing some kind of movement from the government in order to try to move forward and try to regulate as soon as possible the decree in order to oblige Asociación del Fútbol Argentino and other federations to accept the changes. So now we're in the middle of, we are sailing in the middle of the ocean. We are trying to see what is going to happen. Some people say that this new regulation can provide a lot of benefits to the clubs because they will have new investments in order to maintain the clubs and to get better performance in the international events in order to compete with the Brazilian teams, in order to compete with against the European teams. On the other hand, we have people that are very concerned, say, well, we don't want to change anything. We want to maintain the civil associations. We want to maintain the role of the clubs, the specific role of the clubs vis-a-vis the community. So nowadays it's something that say, well, Pablo, can we move forward with an investment in Argentina? Well, we have to see. We have to see what's going to happen. We have to see closely what is happening in the Congress and what is going to happen once the government decides to move forward with the regulation. That probably is going to happen within the following weeks, because we have, off the record, the government has mentioned that they are trying to move forward with this. So nowadays we have to see, probably we are trying to see what is going to happen. What we have listened from Brazil and United Kingdom could give us just a good picture of what may happen in the future in Argentina. My position is we don't have to be concerned about this. We have to regulate, but we don't have to be concerned. We have to allow the situation to move forward. But nowadays, we cannot at least to assure that the decree is going to be accepted at the end by the Congress. So bear in mind that this is already rejected the decree. So we have some kind of uncertainty this month.
Thank you, Pablo. Thank you. That's so true. I mean, we are at the initial stage of the process, I would say, and as you clearly pointed out, there is a heated debate in Argentina as to whether this initiative is going to be passed, accepted, and implemented seamless, which so far it's very uncertain. In any case, I think that we heard today two experiences in the UK and Brazil, which can be regarded as highly successful, because the changes that were implemented allow the football industry to grow, and particularly in Brazil, in quite a short term, the situation has proven to be beneficial, at least for the club, for those who adapted the benefits.
Yes.
Of
for example, what you mentioned is because the guys who are against this new decree in such a way are looking, for example, to Spain, where the main teams, for example, Real Madrid, Barcelona, and Atletico de Bilbao, are not are civil associations, and they are very, very successful.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, we can see in England the teams like Manchester United, Manchester City, that through the new structure and investment has been able to improve and to compete at the highest level in Europe. Brazil probably is having the same situation, as far as I remember. I don't remember. They mentioned Bahia. I don't know if Bragantino is as well another team that has been incorporated by commercial entity. But it's something you have good examples and bad examples. Yes. in both sides. So
yes, and let me ask Pablo, to Carol, Simon, and Rodrigo. We are nearing the end of the hour that we scheduled for this presentation. But after you heard what's going on in Brazil, can you connect anything of what you heard from Pablo of something that happened throughout the process that you experienced in your own jurisdictions? And can you give us an opinion or just closing remarks, with respect to anything that may come up, to your minds, with respect to the situation that Pablo described in our country. So, Carol and Simon, if you want to go first.
Simon, I think you've got a point on.
I find it really interesting because in the United Kingdom we have quite a lot of a fan feeling that having limited companies own football clubs is not a good thing. A lot of fans feel it puts too much power in shareholders who are unaccountable to fans. And so actually one of the law that I mentioned where we're going to get a new regulator, and this is where I was really interested in what Rodrigo said, one of the things that has been talked about there is putting in protections on stadium location, name of the club, shirt color, other things that are key to the heritage of the club but aren't really necessarily commercial. Now that's actually been slightly suppressed in the draft law that we saw before the election, but some clubs and owners who are a little more benevolent, actually often clubs who've gone through financial crisis, do have a fan group that holds a special share that has power to veto stadium moves and things. But the most prominent one at the moment is Brentford in the Premier League, where it actually worked really well. They did move stadium and it's really successful, and despite having this veto there. So it was really interesting to hear that protection was included in the Brazilian law. And I presume possibly, Pablo, something might like that maybe come in Argentina. Should this become a law? I don't know. So it's just interesting. You're moving towards the corporate structure, and in the UK, actually, there's maybe a little bit more of a pull, at least at fan level, to the other way.
Thank you, Simon. Carol, anything you want to add?
Yeah, that was the main point that I took from the discussions. The other thing is just from we can't consider football ownership in isolation. There are levels of regulation, football regulation at a domestic level, confederation level, and the international level. And so, everything will be seen with those levels of regulation in and around it. And so it'd be interesting to see, I would say, how FIFA take the next steps on this, and we'll see whether they look to specifically regulate multi-club ownership.
Thank you, Carol. Rodrigo, your closing remarks? 1 minute.
Yes, of course. I think that Brazil and Argentina used to have the same regime or the same system, and we have the same discussions or issues here in Brazil. We thought that those football politicians would react, but the situation of the clubs didn't allow them to do what I think people are doing now in Argentina. So fortunately, we had the opportunity to move on, and as I expressed before, this is just the beginning. Brazil will really become a very relevant market. So I think that people in Argentina should really look what's happening in Brazil, because things are going to change here. And just to one comment on Spain, I don't think that we can compare what is happening or what happens with Real Madrid and Barcelona with any other situation, because they are not only football clubs, they are more than this. Real Madrid expresses the unification of a country. Barcelona is the proud of a region. So the funds inflows for different reasons, and we cannot use this as an example. A Brazilian club will never be Barcelona, will never be Real Madrid, and this is the same conclusion to Argentina. We should look to what is really going on in the world. And when I look to France, to England, Portugal, whatever, Brazil or United States, Mexico, Argentina should be looking to, in my opinion, to the right direction.
Yeah. Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you so much. Pablo, any final remarks?
No, just to see closely what is happening in the world. Probably this new structure may allow our clubs to get funds and to maintain the players that normally are playing in Europe. So if you want to compete and get against Europe and against Brazil, probably you need funds in order to allow the South American players to stay in South America. So, yeah. So it's always my question. Probably the Libertadores Cup would be an excellent tournament if we could maintain our players in South America, because probably the best players in the world, most of them are coming from South America. So
yes. So true. Well, I think we are 3 minutes past the hour, so it's time to wrap up. And I want to thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge and experiences with us and with the audience today. It has been very, very interesting, at least to me, and I hope it has been the same for all of those who are following us, remotely. And again, thank you so much, Carol, Simon, Pablo, and Rodrigo, for participating in this new edition of our Marval Live Talks. And we hope to see you again very soon on another occasion and another matter. So have a great day, and thank you very much for attending. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Right.
Bye.